guide for you guys today. This time we're going to be talking about the Blood DK. You guys responded pretty well to my Resto guide and to my Guardian Druid guide, and I really appreciate all the likes, the comments, and the subs that came from that. It really feels good to know that actually taking the time to sit down and talk to you guys is actually worth it to a lot of people, and you gain some information from it. That's all I can really ask for. So if you have anything that you want to see me do, please tell me, and I will happily make it for you. Assuming it's something I know anything about, I will try. And I'm always looking for potential ideas for new content. But today we're going to be talking about the Blood DK, which is a tank that I've been playing a lot in my off time when I'm not bear tanking. And I really, really love it. In fact, playing my Blood Death Knight has actually influenced how I play and talent my Druid now. I really do feel like they are incredibly well suited for a lot of the encounters in Hellfire Citadel, and I think they're one of the best designed tanks in the game currently. So I really want to talk to you guys kind of from a beginner's perspective, moving from LFR to normal mode to even higher. Just sort of talk to you guys about the Blood DK, make sure that you have a decent understanding of it. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about talents. I'll point out where the most optimal talents are, and then I'll also point out if you're just starting out, maybe some easier specs for you to play as well. So first, before we even get started talking about talents, for those of you that have never played a DK before or are interested in running one for the first time, you might be wondering why you would play a Blood Death Knight as opposed to any other type of tank. What makes Blood Death Knight special? The primary thing that you need to remember about Blood is that they do not tank using a shield like Paladins or Warriors do. This influences every major design decision that Blizzard's ever made about the Blood Death Knight. And it means that we do not have a lot of passive mitigation. What is passive mitigation for damage? Well, it's basically things like block, which is just an entire mechanic that Paladins and Warriors have, which just basically says I take less damage because I have a specific chance every time I'm hit to take less damage. The game decides that for me. Then you have Druids, which have a higher base dodge chance than any other class in the game. So that functions a lot like the block mechanic does for Warriors and Paladins. Again, the game decides whether or not, with every hit that a Druid takes, whether they will take as much damage as the person sitting next to them. And they have a higher chance than a Death Knight would to essentially dodge an attack or not be hit. Okay? And then, obviously, monks have stagger, which is a mechanic that splits the damage that they take from into two portions: a dot that is ticking on them that they can remove, and then actual instant damage. So at any point in time, a monk is actually taking a proportion of less of the damage that they would take, especially if they decide to purify it. But at the very least, they're shifting it over to the point where it's a lot more manageable for their health pool and their healers. DKs don't have any of this shit. That's the point I'm trying to get across. We don't have any of this shit. We barely have any more passive mitigation than a normal DPSer would. What we do have in compensation for that is a little ability called Death Strike, which kind of is the most important thing in the world to you, is it Blood DK. And what Death Strike does is it hits the target for not a lot of damage, but it heals you for a decent amount of damage, or a healing, which can be affected by Resolve. And if you guys don't know what Resolve is a tanking passive that basically just means you do more healing and absorption to yourself the more damage you take, which is awesome because we want to be healed for more. What Death Strike does after it heals you is it actually gives you a shield that's placed on you called a Blood Shield for a percentage of the amount healed. Now, the higher your mastery is, the more that percentage goes up. So you can kind of see that this replaces our block and our dodge and our stagger. We might get hit for more damage up front as Blood DKs, but we can heal ourselves reliably and effectively as a part of doing our normal rotation. That's something that no other tank can say, except maybe a Druid because of Frenzy Regen, but it's more a byproduct of using your actual resource pool, whereas when you use Death Strike, you're actually generating a specific resource, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is that Blood Death Knights can heal themselves for damage they take and shield themselves against further damage. Not only that, but the Absorb Shield, or the Blood Shield that's placed on you from Death Strike, is also what's known as active mitigation, which basically just means that if there is, fell asleep there, if there is a specific sort of an ability going on, like Kilrog's Shred Armor, for instance. That kind of an ability will not apply a debuff to you so long as you have what the game considers active mitigation. So for druids, Savage Defense; for monks, Elusive Brew; for warriors, shield block. And then for Death Knights, it's the actual shield, the blood shield from your Death Strike. So all in all, this is an incredibly important ability, and it kind of shapes all of the choices that we're going to make, from gearing to talents to rotation. I want you guys to keep one thing in mind, and one thing only, that is all with the idea of doing more Death Strikes more efficiently when we need them. Okay? As long as you remember that, and as long as you keep that in your thought process when you're playing, you're going to do fine. So let's talk about talents now. For the level 56 tier, we have 3 choices for manipulating our diseases. We have Plague Bearer, which just means that our Death Coil and Frost Strike also infect the target and extend the duration of our diseases on the target. Plague Leech, which means that we can consume the Blood Plague and Frost Fever on our target and randomly deplete 2 of our runes as death runes. And then Unholy Blight, which just surrounds us with insects that sting things, do damage, and apply our diseases. Okay, let's just go ahead and start off by saying that there is really only one pick of the tier for any spec of Death Knight whatsoever, and that's Plague Leech. To kind of go in a bit more detail about what Plague Leech actually will do for you, it essentially refunds you the runes that you spend applying Blood Plague and Frost Weaver to your target that you can use for anything. For Frost, this would mean Obliterate. For Unholy, I don't even fucking know because I don't play Unholy, so I don't Festering Strike. I'll just throw it out there. I don't fucking know. Sorry. And then, most importantly, for Blood is Death Strike. So it turns our diseases into an actual way for us to actively mitigate damage. Most importantly, this gives us control over our runes. This is one of the many abilities that give Blood Death Knights the option to, at any point in time, decide that they can Death Strike. No matter what the state of the game is, no matter how they've used their rotation or their resources up until this point, even if they've been AFK up until that point and haven't been doing anything but applying their diseases, they can Plague Leech if they're taking a spike of damage or expecting damage, and they can turn those diseases into a Death Strike to either shield themselves or heal themselves. Obviously, the runes that we're getting are death runes, which are all-purpose runes, so we could also use these 2 runes to do things like double Blood Boil if we needed aggro or something. Or if we needed to use Rune Tap, we could do that as well. So there's a lot of uses to Plague Leech, and is by far the best talent because, again, it gives us control. I'm going to talk about the other 2 talents and when you might use them, but at the end of the day, guys, it has to fall in line with our credo for Blood Death Knight, which is, of course, the name of the game is as many Death Strikes as possible, as effectively as possible, and when you need them. So that's all Plague Leech right there. Plague Bearer really doesn't do anything for you because your disease duration is refreshed whenever you Blood Boil as a Death Knight. So it's honestly very redundant. Then you have the idea behind Plague Bearer is that you wouldn't have to spend runes to refresh diseases, but you already don't. The idea is that you don't even have to spend the blood rune that you would use on Blood Boil to refresh it. But, see, even there, Blood Boil is free sometimes for DKs, so, Plague Bearer just needs to kind of be scrapped. Unholy Blight is probably, if you wanted something a bit more passive and less to manage, then Plague Leech is what I would suggest, because it can do some pretty decent damage. And if you take a Necrotic Plague as your level 100 talent, it can be nice for stacking that up really, really quickly on your enemies. And like I said, if you want something that looks really cool and is really easy to manage, then you can go with Unholy Blight. But it's by far not even anywhere close to as good for you as Plague Leech will be. Now, level 57, we have Lichborn, which basically just increases your immunity to fear and sleep and things like that. It's not really going to be useful. Anti-Magic Zone, which replaces your Anti-Magic Shell and places like this giant Anti-Magic Shell in everyone. It's a raid cooldown. And then you have Purgatory, which basically just means if you would die, you are saved from death, and if you were healed up past the damage that you would have taken, then you will be saved. So it really just comes down to Anti-Magic Zone or Purgatory, as Lichborn is more PvP than anything else. Anti-Magic Zone is great if the fight calls for it and if your raid leader says you should take it, but 9 times out of 10 if there's another DK in the raid that's not a tank, they'll be asked to take Anti-Magic Zone before you will anyway, because of the fact that Purgatory is so good for blood tanks. Purgatory is just a passive reset button almost. It almost never really saves you, but it can save you a lot of the times as well. It's kind of like Ardent Defender before it got heavily changed, but even then it's still nowhere near as good as the original Ardent Defender, which was just ridiculous. But this is kind of close. But the only time you really would take Anti-Magic Zone over Purgatory is if you're just never really in danger of dying. If you're doing content that's just, you're really never going to use Purgatory unless you fuck up royally. And then Anti-Magic Zone would just reduce the amount of damage other people are taking as well as yourself, then yay. Or if you're just going to get hit so hard that Purgatory is not going to matter. You're never going to get healed up in that time frame anyway. Like if you die, it's just a wipe kind of deal. But generally speaking, passive reset button is awesome. No, I mean, what more could you want as a tank? Do-over, awesome. Your level 58, there's really no choice but Death's Advance. What Death's Advance does is it makes you move faster. Our mobility is a huge hindrance for Death Knights. We just don't move that quickly. But when you think about it, we're like walking zombie dudes, so it kind of makes sense. So any sort of movement speed increase is great. Chill Planes, it slows things. It doesn't really help us. If we really want to slow stuff, I'd rather take Remorseless Winter, which is farther down. So, And then Asphyxiate, which is, if I do believe, it is like a ranged silence stun type deal, kind of like Fist of Justice, I want to say. But it's like Force Choke, and who doesn't want Force Choke? Anybody that wants to move faster than a snail probably wants, doesn't want Force Choke. I don't know. You're going to be taking Death's Advance if you're a raiding DK 100% of the time. You need to be able to keep up with the group to get to adds quickly. If you're taking 5-mans, you need to be able to chain pull and get in front of your group. There is no substitute for Death's Advance, unfortunately. I honestly think, again, kind of should just be baked in because there's just really no substitute for it. Now, level 60. This is where it really gets tough, and I'm already out of breath. But there is, again, a huge debate on, well, there's not a huge debate, but people will try to make things work here that really don't. Okay, so this tier is some sort of ability to manipulate your runes. This augments your rune regeneration speed. Without this tier, you would just generate runes really, really slowly, and you wouldn't want to play your Death Knight because you would get hit a lot and you would be able to Death Strike a lot. So this tier is very necessary, and it's very necessary to pick the right one. So we'll just talk about each one of the talents, what they do, and then we'll talk about which one is best. So you have Rune of Corruption, which basically increases your rune regeneration speed every time. You have a 1.5 chance when you use Runic Power, so when you Death Coil essentially, to increase your rune regeneration rate by 100% for 3 seconds, which is great. Faster rune regeneration, right? Then you have Runic Empowerment, which you have a 1.5 chance every single time that you Death Coil pretty much to randomly regenerate a depleted rune. Fuck rune regeneration speed, it just gives you a random rune. And then Blood Tap, which every 15 runic power you spend generates a blood charge, max up to 12 charges. Blood Tap consumes fly blood charges to activate a randomly depleted rune as a death rune. Okay, so let's talk about these. Let's break this down. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. As you can see here, I've selected Blood Tap. It is by far the best option in this tier. What Blood Tap does for you is it allows you to pool blood charges. You'll notice it says every 15 runic power you spend, you get a charge of Blood Tap, which means that every single time you Death Coil, which costs 30 runic power, you get 2 charges of Blood Tap, and you can consume 5 of them to give yourself a randomly depleted rune. Kinda sounds a little bit like Plague Leech, doesn't it? You'd be right, and that's why it's great. One, it's because as opposed to the other 2 abilities in this tier, it is not a chance upon using Runic Power. It is guaranteed that every single time you Death Strike, you will get 2 charges of Blood Tap, no matter what. It never changes. And that's what we want as a DK, as a tank at least. We want to be able to ensure that we're going to be able to have this resource and we can track it and we can expect it and we can anticipate it and factor it into our thought process. So that's really great. Also, you can hold up to 12 charges, which if you're good at math, which I'm usually not, but even I can figure this out. If you can have 12 charges and it takes 5 charges to regenerate a rune, you can use this back to back to get 2 death runes. And if I remember correctly, because I played this game more than once in my life, 2 death runes equals a death strike. And that's what we want, right? Because that's our credo, right? Is more death strikes more effectively when we need them. Not when the game decides on a 1.5 chance that I can maybe get a rune that might be used for death strike, or to regenerate my runes faster so I still have to wait for runes for that. No. Blood Tap on demand gives you the runes. Is it something else to track? You bet your ass it is. But Death Knights have never been the easy mode tank, alright? Nothing comes easy to us. But we have control over our damage. This is why it's so beneficial for us to have something that is not passive mitigation to damage. It's not block chance, it's not dodge chance, it is on demand. I know no matter what happens, I can heal myself when I need to, and I can place a damage absorption shield on myself. And Blood Tap follows in that logic. No matter what happens, I know I'm going to get the same amount of resource generated from this ability, and I can use it when I need to mitigate damage. Okay, that's the idea. So Blood Tap, it's pretty much just the best for every spec. If you wanted something that is a little bit easier to use, and it won't be the end of the world if you don't choose Blood Tap, especially not if you're doing it, you know, heroic dungeons, you know, LFR, stuff like that, I don't know. Then Runic Corruption is fine. Runic Corruption just gives you a far more fluid flood of your resources over the course of a fight. And if you do have a lot of multi-strike, and we'll talk about how multi-strike affects runic power, then it can be really nice and very fluid. But it's, again, sometimes we don't just need fluid, we need on demand. And so that's why Blood Tap is still a little bit better, okay? Next, on level 75, we have Death Siphon, Death Pact, and Conversion. This is some sort of healing that we can do to ourselves. Conversion turns your runic power into health until your runic power runs out or you cancel the effect. With massive, massive, massive levels of multi-strike, so a lot of runic power generation, this could be good, but then at that point in time, you probably want to take Breath of Sindragosa, which kind of makes this redundant. So in general, Conversion is just never used. Death Siphon deals a little bit of damage and heals you for 400% of the damage dealt, which sounds great, but when I say a little bit of damage, I mean a little bit of fucking damage. It's usually not going to be that powerful, and it costs a death rune, which is half of a death strike. No thank you, because again, that is the actual reverse of what we want to be doing, which is more death strikes more effectively when we need them. Death Siphon, the opposite way. You could even look at Conversion like that as well, because it spends your runic power, which you'd rather be using on Death Coil to gain Blood Tap charges, to heal yourself, which doesn't help you either, right? So Death Pact is really the only one. It doesn't require a resource. It heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but places a healing absorb on you for equal to 25% of your maximum health, which basically just means you're going to get healed up a lot by yourself, but then healers are going to have to keep healing you, or you're never going to be able to get healed. So it's just really important that your healers understand how DKs work and understand that when your health goes way the fuck up, that you probably Death Pact and they still need to heal you. You're not out of the woods yet, because if they don't heal you, you're going to have this huge absorption shield placed on yourself for healing, and if you get chunked, you're still going to die. Okay, that's just one thing. You can help this yourself by using things like Vampiric Blood and Death Strike. We'll talk about that in a second. So you can mitigate this yourself, and you can maybe heal through it yourself. Depends on how much health you have and what's going on in the fight. But just make sure your healers know, hey, I've used Death Pact. You do need to heal me a little bit here, even though it doesn't look like you need to heal me. Okay, level 90. It kind of kills me when people say this is, you know, situational tier, but it kind of is, right? Your choice is really between Gorfine's Grasp and Remorseless Winter. Most people love Gorfine's Grasp, as do I, because it's excellent at controlling adds. At least one DK in your raid needs to have Gorfine's Grasp, and it should probably be the tank, because then they can better position the mobs where they know they need to be. However, it can also be great for, you know, like a fight like Archimonde or Manoroth, where like a Frost DK or a DPS DK will want to grip Infernals away from the tanks. So that can also be great. But basically this just lets you control all the ads and pull them together. It's absolutely fucking amazing for tanks. But Remorseless Winter is actually really, really good too, because it basically applies a lot of CC and eventually stun things so they won't hit you for a little bit. So it's really cool. It is really, really good actually, and I kind of like it in 5-mans. If I didn't love Gorfien's Grasp so much in 5-mans, it's actually a close second when it's useful. And then there are some times where Gorfien's Grasp isn't useful. So kind of experiment with both and see where you can pick them up. And also, like I said, if another DK in your raid has one, go with the other and give your group the maximum utility they possibly can. But usually speaking, as a tank, you'll want to go for the Gorfien's Grasp in that situation. Now, we're almost done. Level 100 talents, we have Necrotic Plague, which basically just replaces your Blood Plague and Frost Fever, gives you a dot that now stacks up to a certain amount of times instead of having a duration, and anything that applies that, it's just ability like Frost Strike, Icy Touch, sorry, and Plague Strike or Outbreak don't refresh it, it simply gives it another stack, okay? And then anytime that something that has Necrotic Plague on it tries to attack you, you gain 2 runic power, which is pretty cool. You have Defile, which replaces your Death and Decay. It throws down like the shadowy shit on the ground that does a lot of damage, and it grows in damage and in size whenever something stands in it, which is awesome. And, most importantly, enemies standing in your Defile deal 10% less damage to you. Fuck yeah! And then finally, yeah, Breath of Sindragosa continuously deals a bunch of damage to everything in front of you in a cone, and affects them with Mark of Sindragosa for 6 seconds, reducing the damage to secondary targets, and you will continue breathing until all of your runic power is spent. It also causes you to be healed for 10% of spell damage dealt by afflicted enemies. Breath of Sindragosa can be really, really good, and I guess this is the time where I should talk to you guys about the 2 specific styles of playing Blood DK. You have 2 choices here in this tier. Necrotic Plague, generally not taken. You have the choice between Defile or Breath of Sindragosa. Breath of Sindragosa is only going to be useful for you when you have a shit ton of multi-strike, because multi-strike helps us generate runic power, as we'll talk about later. If you don't have and I mean shit ton, I don't even mean like a standard shit ton, I mean a metric fucking shit ton of multi-strikes, you should be taking Breath of Sindragosa, because it eats your runic power, right? So we want to have a ton of runic power to use. And even then, I personally don't like it because it goes against our mantra, in my opinion, of using Death Coil to gain blood tap charges to use the blood tap charges on Death Strike, which means, again, more Death Strikes more effectively when we need them. But Breath of Sindragosa on its own can be really, really good depending on the fight, and can do a shit ton of damage. So if you're not in danger of dying, and you really want, and the fight really calls for it, and you do have the multi-strike to use it, Breath of Sindragosa can be amazing. All in all, if you vastly overgear some stuff, which you probably aren't watching this guide for the okay for me to do it, but if you vastly overgear stuff, specifically in the multi-strike category, go ahead and take Breath. It's really, really fun and really awesome to use, but it's, in my opinion, it goes against the best way to play a Death Knight. So that's all I'm going to say about Breath of Sindragosa. Defile is just fucking good, right? It's just good. But the problem is with Defile that it still also flies in the face of our mantra, which is more Death Strikes, more effectively. I was waiting for you guys to fill it in, but I'll go ahead and say it, when we need them. Because it costs an Unholy Rune, which is half of a Death Strike. But we do have a little talent that actually, or a little ability that makes our Defiles free and do not cost runes, so that's why it's still good. It means we can use it less often without clipping our Death Strikes, but we can still use it without clipping our Death Strikes, and it just does a shit ton of damage, and it reduces the damage you take. And you can't really go wrong with that as a tank, right? So, typically speaking, if you don't have a shit ton of multi-strike, and like I mean like when I say shit ton of multi-strike, like you go to your character panel and you look at your stats, and instead of a number, it just says you have a shit ton of multi-strike, then you should be taking Defile. Point blank, period. Alright, so that kind of goes over all that. We'll talk briefly about glyphs. We have Glyph of Outbreak. This is the most important one. Everything else can fuck off for the most part. In fact, I don't even have all my minor glyphs in here right now. But Glyph of Outbreak is very important because it works well with Plague Leech. We talked about how Plague Leech sucks our diseases off of our target. What Outbreak allows us to do is apply our diseases without having to use Blood Plague, without having to use a Blood Rune. I'm sorry, not a Blood Rune. Jesus. An Unholy Rune or a Frost Rune. This is great for anything, like even if you didn't take Plague Leech for whatever reason, because this means that, yay, that's one more Blood Strike if you guys are keeping, or Death Strike if you guys are keeping track, which is fucking awesome. But instead, it now costs us 30 Runic Power, so it just means that it's a little bit harder to apply our diseases at the beginning of a fight, and also means that we'll be using less Death Coils over the course of a fight, because we're going to be using Outbreak every so often to apply our diseases. But that's not a huge deal. And usually having the ability to just go Outbreak, suck some diseases off the target, which didn't technically cost us any runes, which basically just literally net gains us runes over the course of a fight, which we can immediately use for a Death Coil, or not Death Coil, sorry. Everything is blood and death, and I get confused. I'm sorry, guys. Which we can immediately use for a Death Strike to give us what we need, whether it be a heal or an absorb, right? Awesome. Then you have Glyph of Blood Boil, which increases the radius of Blood Boil, which just effectively increases its damage when there are fights with a lot of ads spread out, and also means that you'll be able to spread your diseases, which is important. The more things have your diseases, the more things you can Plague Leech, the more potential Death Strikes you can use. So, Glyph of Blood Boil. And then finally, Glyph of Regenerative Magic. Now, there's a shit ton of anti-magic shell glyphs, and they're pretty much all good, and you can pick which one you want to use. I use Glyph of Regenerative Magic basically because I just like the reduction in the cooldown to be able to use it more often over the course of a fight. I find that it's one of my favorite Death Knight cooldowns, not only because it's defensive, but also because it gives you runic power, and that equals more Death Strikes, like we talked about this. So that is personally why I really like Glyph of Regenerative Magic, but you can take the other ones too. They're really good as well. Just note that anything that has to deal with anti-magic shell, you can't have more than one glyph at the same time. The only minor glyph that I have on here right now is Glyph of Resilient Grip, which just means when your Death Grip fails, it's instantly reset, which basically means you can use Death Grip as another taunt, and if the mob is not able to be gripped, they're immune to that, they'll still be taunted, and then your Death Grip will just reset, so you can use it on something else, which I like. It's just another taunt that essentially won't really go on cooldown unless you've used it to successfully grip something, which can be nice in raids when you miss a taunt or something like that, or you do something stupid. You should also probably take Glyph of Army of the Dead, which stops your ghouls from taunting things. I actually like using this in non-raid environments like Mythic 5-mans, because it means that bosses will focus on your ghouls more, which means that you won't have to take as much damage. The only time that wouldn't be good is if they have like a tail swipe or a frontal thing, or they just need to be positioned in a certain way, in which case you don't want the ghouls taunting them and chasing them all over the fucking place, right? Your last minor glyph doesn't really fucking matter. It really doesn't matter at all. Pick whichever one you want. Whew. Okay. So, now with all that shit being said, how do we play this fucker, right? We still have to talk about that. Okay. So, your rotation, if you can call it that, is actually a lot more simple than it seems. You have two different resources. You have runes, you have blood, Frost and Unholy Runes, which after the Frost and Unholy Runes are used for Death Strike, they can become Death Runes, which is awesome, and they can be used for Death Strikes again, pretty much. And then your Blood Runes can be used for either Rune Tap or Blood Boil. The general idea is this. You want to apply your diseases with Outbreak as soon as you have runic power to use. You generate runic power by using your runes. So if you're starting a fight fresh with no runic power, basically what you want to do is open with Death Strike. This gives you a shield, probably won't heal you, but it'll give you a shield, which is nice for the next incoming attack. It'll have 2 of your runes regenerating as Death Runes, and it'll give you runic power so that you can apply your Outbreak. From there, you're just going to use another Death Strike to get rid of your other pair of Unholy and Frost Runes, to have those regenerating as Death Runes, and then you're just going to either use Blood Boil as you see fit. If there are other adds, Blood Boil is important for gaining aggro. If it's just a boss and they're hitting hard, you can use Rune Tap, okay? Very, very standard. That's how you deplete all of your runes and you gain runic power. what you do with Runic Power, you only have two choices if you take an R setup, and that's Outbreak or Death Coil, and you only need to use Outbreak when your target doesn't have diseases. So anything else, you're just going to be using Death Coil. Death Coil is going to kind of be your filler ability that you're going to kind of use when your runes are regenerating, okay? What's really important about a DK is to never use too much of one resource without using a little bit of the other. What I mean by this is you don't want to use your runes too much all at once, because your Runic Power does cap out at 100. So you don't want to go over in Runic Power. You also don't want to have yourself at 0 Runic Power when your runes are regenerating, and you don't want to use Blood Tap yet, because then you're not going to have anything to press. So just understand that you want to kind of be using your Death Coil to fill in the gaps, also to be able to store up your Blood Tap charges. If that weren't enough, you also have an ability called Enhanced Death Coil, which actually, if I can pull it up here, actually increases your maximum health by, I believe, 3% for 30 seconds when you Death Coil, which is awesome. So you basically just get a bigger health pool, which is never a bad thing, okay? So just even more reason for you to go ahead and want to use your Death Coil. Also really important to understand, guys, is like I said, you want to be using Blood Boil basically whenever you don't need to use Rune Tap because nothing's hitting you that hard, or there's more than one ad. Like we said, Blood Boil will spread our diseases to our targets. It'll use up our blood runes, which really, they don't have much other focus for us. They don't actually, apply to Death Strikes, so, which is weird, right? You would think blood, death, whatever. But it, like I said, it also spreads your diseases. But you also have this Crimson Scourge, which just means that successful attacks against targets that have Blood Plague, which is one of our diseases, actually have a chance to proc Crimson Scourge. And what this does is it actually makes your next Blood Boil or Defile free and costs no runes. This is great because it just automatically pops up when you're doing your normal rotation, which is another reason why we want to have diseases on everything that we possibly can. Not only do they do passive threat and damage, they also potentially give us free Blood Boils and Defiles. Obviously, the more Defiles we can use over the course of the fight, the more damage we can reduce because of that 10% damage reduction. Obviously, the more Blood Boils we use, the more we can spread our diseases and kind of start this whole process over again. But we also have this neat little ability that's baked into Blood Boil. Every single time you Blood Boil, you actually gain a buff on yourself that increases the healing done from your next Death Strike by 20%, stacking up to 5 times, I do believe. So you can increase it up to 100%, right? So by all means, this just means it goes way, way, way back to Operation Numero Uno, which is to apply your diseases to your target before doing anything else, because every single melee hit that you are dealing to your targets without your diseases, you have less chance of using Blood Boil, which means you have less buffs to Death Strike, which means you're doing your Death Strikes less effectively, which is breaking rule number 1 of your Death Knight, which is, again, more Death Strikes more effectively and when we need them. So that is why Blood Boil is actually so important, okay? A lot of people actually don't know that's in there. I didn't know that was in there for a long time, but it actually really, adds some merit to how we use our blood runes and to Blood Boil and to making sure that we're maximizing Crimson Scourge. But like I said, you should also, whenever you have Defile off of cooldown and Blood Boil, and then you get a Crimson Scourge proc, you want to use it on Defile because you don't want to use Defile as much when it will actually deplete your Unholy Rune, because that's half of your Death Strike, which goes against our whole mantra as a DK, right? So you want to try to use Crimson Scourge on Defile more than anything, but Crimson Scourge does not reset the cooldown of Defile, it just makes it free, so you'll still use Blood Boil when Defile's on cooldown, and you get a Crimson Scourge proc, which happens way more than you think it would, right? So that kind of covers a lot of the abilities that come standard for a DK that aren't talented abilities. We already talked about Plague Leech. We talked about Death Strike. I guess we could talk a little bit about proper Death Strike usage. Basically, you want to use Death Strike as much as you can over the course of a fight, but you do want to hold off on it for when you've actually taken damage. The reason why is because you don't want the heal that Death Strike gives you to go to waste. You also you also want it to benefit from Resolve as much as possible, right? So, the Absorption Shield portion of it. So what you basically want to do is to make it so that your heal is going to be as effective to you as you possibly can. So take a little bit of damage, use a Death Strike. It's going to be way better for you than just constantly Death Striking when you're at full health. Yes, the shields will always be good, and that's what makes Death Strike a better mechanic than something like Frenzy Regeneration, which doesn't give you return on investment if it overheals. It just poof goes out into the nether. The shield will always be good, but the heal plus the shield is the best thing for you, okay? Also keep in mind how many blows you've used before Death Strike, because it will mean that you can effectively take more damage before having the Blood Strike, and you'll still be able to heal yourself up for more because you have that buff coming from your blood boils. That's a little bit more advanced. If you don't kind of track that kind of stuff, it's not going to hurt you too much. You can just passively benefit from it. So that's just something to know that's going on kind of in the background. Just time this ability so that you've taken a little bit of damage, so that you'll benefit from the heal and the shield. And also, if you have an upcoming moment of active mitigation, for instance, Shred Armor on Kilrogg, make sure that you have this so that you can apply your Blood Shield to yourself. So at that point in time, you would want to use it preemptively because the Blood Shield will keep you from taking the active mitigation ability. Okay. So we already talked about how to use Blood Tap. Use it whenever you need to use Death Strike pretty much. So that's kind of all of your core rotational abilities right there. If you didn't choose to take Defile, you're just going to use Death and Decay on cooldown, and whenever you have Crimson Scourge procs, just the same. Now let's talk about our cooldowns, because we have a fuck ton of cooldowns as the Blood DK. This is what I actually like most about this class, is because we don't have the passive mitigation, we have an array of active abilities for us to hit to say, hey, I take less damage or no damage from this specific type of ability in this circumstance, which actually means that DKs can cheese a hell of a lot in a lot of encounters, okay? So Rune Tap is one of the things that I kind of throw in this category, though it's not really. It's active mitigation, so you can have it up, and then you won't take, like, that Shred Armor we were talking about before. I kind of look at it, though, because I'm coming from playing a Druid, as a bit of a version of Survival Instincts. 40% damage for 3 seconds, 2 charges, and it's a lot like Survival Instincts, actually. And that's how I typically look at it. But you want to use this ability wherever you don't need to use Blood Boil because you have aggro on something, you don't need to spread your diseases, but something is hitting you for a lot. You want to use Rune Tap, and you want to use it often enough so that one of its charges is always recharging, because you can't go past 2 charges, so you don't want it trying to regenerate a third, because then, again, it's going poof into the nether. So you want to kind of use one about every 30 seconds, but obviously saving it, because there might be a point where you are taking heavy sustained damage for 6 seconds, and you want to be able to reduce all of it, and that's perfectly fine as well. Then you have Icebound Fortitude, which is just your big tank cooldown, 50% damage for 8 seconds, which is just, if you're about to get hit by something really big, you definitely want this. We already talked about how to use Death Pact. Anti-Magic Shell is incredible. So it places a shield on you that absorbs magical damage and gives you runic power for anytime it absorbs damage while you have this on. This is one of the primary DK cheesing abilities, and it's one of my favorites. You can literally stand in the bad and get runic power. So one thing that people will do is they will find fights where they can stand in bad stuff, use Anti-Magic Shell, get just nothing but runic power, and then use Breath of Sindragosa. It's totally possible. And that's just one of the reasons why I love Death Knights, because they break certain things and they're meant to function like this. It's awesome. And just coming from a Druid not having an effective magic cooldown to having an effective magic cooldown is awesome. So please use this ability as much as you possibly can throughout the course of a fight. It literally gives you more runic power, which gives you more death coils, which gives you more blood taps, which gives you more death strikes, so you want it. You want it a lot. Vampiric Blood increases your maximum health by 15% and increases the healing you receive by 15%. It's kind of a no shit button. It gives you more health, but most importantly, it gives you better healing to yourself, so you can use it in combination with certain things, including like your Death Strike and just, you know, incoming heals and stuff like that. Basically, just don't forget it's there. It's only on a 1 minute cooldown, so use it a lot. That's another thing. A lot of these guys are really short cooldowns. Outside of Icebound Fortitude, you have a lot less 3 minute cooldowns than a lot of other classes do, so definitely be aware of that. Then you have Dancing Rune Weapon. I'm sorry, you hear my dog running around the background. Dancing Rune Weapon, basically, while it's active, it's another weapon for you. It gives you 20% parry, so you want to try to prioritize using this. Excuse me, my dog is being an idiot. You want to prioritize using this when you are facing a lot of physical attacking mobs, because it gives you a higher parry chance, which again is just that passive mitigation we were talking about. But it also replicates a lot of your attacks. So like it can replicate Death Strike, and it can replicate, and most importantly, it can replicate your diseases. You can actually have this on when you use Outbreak, and you can apply 4 sets of diseases to your target, which is great for dealing damage and threat, but also it's great for being used with Outbreak, because it means, or I'm sorry, with Plague Leech, because it means you can leech your one set of those diseases off your target and not have to immediately apply another set with Outbreak. So you can save that runic power and use it with Death Coil to gain blood tap charges, to gain Death Strikes. So it's more Death Strikes over the course of a fight if you use this ability a lot. So use it a lot. But prioritize using it when you're being hit by a lot of physical mobs, and you'll see a better defensive result from it as well. Army of the Dead just summons a bunch of ghouls. It doesn't have any sort of defensive value to it anymore, except for when it can taunt bosses, which is usually outside of a raid, and they can take the heat off if you kind of like Zuin and monks. You have Mind Freeze, which is your interrupt, and you have a Battle Res, which is awesome as well. You also have Gorfian's Grasp. Use this whenever you know things can be gripped to you. Death Grip, try to use it on everything, see what it grips. And then you have Bone Shield. Bone Shield basically puts a shield on you that has 8 charges that reduces the damage you take by 20%, and then attacks consume your charges. Basically, Bone Shield is awesome. I look at it a lot like Pulverize for druids, but fucking just kind of sits there and doesn't require you to build up a resource for it. You can just basically use it every minute, which is great. 20% damage reduction every minute is good. Try to line this up for when you're going to need it. Other than that, though, you should be great by just using it as many times as you can over the course of a fight. Okay. Not much else really to talk about here, except we'll talk about our gearing choices and our stat priority, right? Because we have to talk about that shit. Pay no attention to my terrible item level. Like I said, I just boosted this guy like last week, so give me a break. But for stats, you're going to prioritize, if you've chosen Defile as your level 100 talent, you want to prioritize Mastery over everything else. Mastery is just an incredible stat for DKs. It increases the healing. It does not increase your healing, excuse me. It increases the absorb that you receive from your death strikes. It increases because it actually, for every point in mastery, you gain a percentage of that will be converted to your death shield, which is awesome. Just means more shields. And it increases your attack power by 26%, which just means it's a great defensive and offensive stat. And it kind of just helps in the whole I want to reduce damage kind of feel from your Defile, which is great. And it's by far the best complement to it. Then if you are not taking Defile, you want to choose Multi-Strike, because Multi-Strike actually works with Runic Strikes, which just means that our auto attack critical strike, or our auto attack multi-strikes generate 2%, I believe it's 2% runic power, or 2 runic power, 15 runic power. What the fuck, where did I get 2 from? I don't know, I'm going crazy. So 15 runic power every time we multi-strike with an auto attack, which is pretty fucking awesome, right? Not only that, we also gain passively 5% more multi-strike from all sources, which is just great. So if you're using Breath of Sindragosa, which if you remember, just is a constant stream of sucking out our runic power to turn it into damage, you want to make sure that you're going as much multi-strike as possible. If you're not using that ability, you just want to go Mastery, because Mastery is always going to be beneficial for you, all right? It's just direct healing, or direct absorption, and direct attack power increase. Multi-strike is good though, so what I have is kind of a mixture. I try to go for Mastery on gear whenever I can, and then as you'll see, like here for instance, and I know 680 ring, I know, but I'll try to enchant for multi-strike. What this does for me is, yes, it kind of splits my damage kind of a bit more evenly, but most importantly, it gives me a very smooth and fluid rotation, because it gives me more potential death coils over the course of a fight, which, like I said, yay, more death coils, more death strikes, but it also gives me something to fill in those holes when my runes are on cooldown. If you're not the best at managing that kind of stuff, then more multi-strike will definitely help you out a lot with that. So that is kind of the end of my guide for right now. I plan to revisit this guide a little bit in the future, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And I look forward to kind of talking to you guys in the future. Please rate, comment, and subscribe if you have any questions. If I said anything incorrectly, there are like 3 things running out in my mind and I just spouted off at the top of the head and they were completely wrong. So feel free to point those out and tell me I'm stupid down in the comments below. But thank you guys for watching so much.